Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Remote Real Estate Investor. I'm Michael Album, and today I'm joined by Dan Wold, president of the American Land Title Association. And he's going to be talking to us today about title insurance. What is it? When do we need it? As well as wire fraud and how to combat it in all of our real estate transactions. So let's get into it. Hey, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show and hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, and hopefully we can touch on some really important topics today.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to it. And right before we started recording here, you and I were chatting about kind of what it is that the American Land Title Association does, and you are the president of. But so I'd love if you could share a little bit with our listeners.
Well, our governance structure has a board of governors, and this year I am the, just incoming president for the upcoming year. Just kind of a real quick primer on title insurance. We basically are involved with land title transfers and then ensuring the lien priorities of the lenders as well. So we issue owner's title insurance policies to the consumer that purchases the property. And we like to kind of just boil it down to, we protect property interests, and we also provide peace of mind because we're the ones that sweat the details in relation to all the stuff that goes on in relation to a settlement or closing. And so that the consumer, they run around doing all kinds of things at the last minute, and we're there to help them and give them peace of mind.
It's funny how many things get pushed until the very last minute in most closings, isn't it?
Yeah, and things pop up. We've got so many land title professionals around the country that, do this for a living and have seen pretty much everything that you can throw at them, that they are very capable at, navigating the challenges that could come up in any given closing transaction.
Well, that's good to know that I don't have to be the first guinea pig with any of my closings coming up. So that's exciting. I'm curious, Dan, if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what title insurance is, because I've got to admit, as part of the head coach and program manager with the Roofstock Academy, this is a question that I get asked a lot of times by students in the program. So give us a kind of a high level breakdown of just what is it and why should somebody maybe think about getting it, because it is optional oftentimes with an all cash deal.
Well, it is. It's a one-time charge that occurs as part of the closing transaction. And essentially what we do, which is interesting and unique about our industry versus other insurance industries, a lot of other insurance industries will use actuarials and then pool risk. Mm-hmm. What we do is we basically sweat the details and we research the land property records and other pertinent information so that when we issue our policy, it will say that you are holding title to that parcel of property or land, and then subject to only the identified defects or lien rights that might occur. For example, if you take out a mortgage to purchase or a deed of trust, depending on the part of the country that you're in, to acquire that property, then that would be shown as an exception to clear title. And what happens then is if there's somebody that comes in and challenges your interest, and if it falls within the scope of the coverage provisions of the policy, then we would defend, and then also to the extent that we miss something, then we would also have an obligation to pay money to recompense the landowner or consumer for the diminution and the like in relation to what we insured and what was the reality that they have in relation to that property. And so we provide a lot of peace of mind on a one-time, it's your largest purchase for most people in their lifetime. And it gives you peace of mind that if somebody comes and challenges it, and there are instances where mistakes are made, and if you don't acquire it, then You might be able to go back against the prior owner if you got a warranty deed, but they might not have any money or you can't pursue them. And so this is a third party that basically has the money to stand behind essentially their contractual obligations under the title insurance policy.
Okay. So if I were to break that down and say it another way, help keep me on the rails here. So if I'm a buyer and I want to go buy a piece of property and I get into contract and I'm going to the closing table and I see that line item that says title insurance that I have the option to buy, and I do buy it, I opt to buy it. Now, 6 months down the road, somebody comes knocking on my door and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Michael, I actually own this property, you don't own it." I could then engage with my title insurance company and say, "Hey, this person is claiming to have a right to ownership of this property. I clearly own it based on the transaction I just went through 6 months ago." And so the title insurance company is going to help correct any outstanding issues and get this issue resolved.
Yeah, or we have also a duty to defend if someone sues you and claims that they have ownership interests.
Okay.
So there's multiple indemnification obligations under the policy, including the duty to defend. So basically you're pretty much spot on as to put it in layman's terms, kind of the function of what our product does and the assurances that we give.
Okay. And I'm just curious, in your experience, Dan, what type of claims have you seen where somebody can come to an owner and say, "Actually, I own the property," and that wasn't picked up during the title search during due diligence phase of that subsequent purchase?
Well, I think another way to think about it, it's not always just a claim against ownership. It could be that there's a missed easement, so that all of a sudden you've got a utility easement in the back of your entire back of your yard, and you were intending to put a swimming pool in there. There's a wide range of defects that could fall within the scope of coverage. And so basically, to the extent that what is revealed in the title insurance policy as the scope of what are the diminutions from your absolute ownership of that property without any third-party interest affecting it from an easement or other standpoint, those are also matters that could fall within the scope of coverage and could result in us taking action to remove the defect or providing you with a money award in relation to the scope of coverage.
Interesting. Okay. And something that, and we always joke on the show that so often these episodes are self-serving, that the hosts get to ask these questions that we're interested in anyhow, and then the listeners get the benefit of that. But so something that I'm curious about is often we hear the term chain of title. And if you can keep your name out of the chain of title, if you're going to be using an LLC, there could be advantages to that. But so my question is how far down the chain of title do you see people run into issues that involve title insurance?
Well, I would suggest that more frequently than not, you're going to see stuff that's more current that was missed. And, one of the things to keep in mind, a lot of times errors occur. Any human endeavor, there can be errors. And so searching errors, for example, can give rise to a significant portion of our claims. So basically we would go in and search, but there are other things that could arise too, because if they were not recorded properly in the land title records and so forth, there might be something that's sitting out there, a stray deed or other things. So there's a whole range of factors that could give rise to a claim, and then we would look at whether or not it falls under the scope of coverage. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if we have an obligation, we would try to cure the defect, because ultimately we want consumers to be, happy about their largest purchase. But if we can't cure that defect, then we could also provide a monetary award in relation to what that policy provides. Yeah, to circle back to your question, you could have something that's way back in the records, and remember, it's kind of like a chain of title. Is basically, if you look at the real property records, let's say a county, use a county model, they're basically going to show transaction to transaction to transaction, and you could go back and actually see what kind of history of who owned, the property or a portion of the property that you have. Uh, Oftentimes properties will be larger parcels that are subdivided or platted into a subdivision, and then you can go back to that original deed that came before the plat or subdivision occurred. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have the ability to search and go back, and that's what we do to determine whether or not there's any issues in relation to clear ownership rights to a piece of property.
Interesting. I've got another question for you, Dan, that I think I already know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyhow. Is there ever an instance where you'd recommend not getting title insurance?
From my standpoint, I know that some people elect not to purchase owner's title insurance. Partly, sometimes they just are not well educated as to the risks, or just make the value judgment that I'd rather buy a couch instead of, ensuring that I have pure ownership or clear ownership pursuant to this policy. Right. To the title, and they're willing to roll the dice. But from my standpoint, personally, I would not roll the dice with your largest purchase for most people in their lifetimes. Yeah. And it's a one-time payment that gives you peace of mind and basically provides you recourse in the event that what you thought you were getting is not what you got.
No, I think that's very well said. And is it something that you can buy after the fact? If you decide this year, hey, I'm going to roll the dice, and maybe next year, well, I'm
generally no. We need you to buy it at the time you purchase, because it basically it's a snapshot in time. That's basically we look back, and as of the date of closing, you have these rights, and we insure those rights.
Okay. So for anybody out there listening that's thinking, is on the fence about whether or not to purchase title insurance with their purchase, think long and hard, because it's a one-time deal that you can't go back and redo.
Yeah, and there's lots of horror stories of people that situations where all of a sudden things emerge and they've lost their ownership rights, or even worse, just getting involved with litigation. If it's a covered matter, the cost of litigation is something that your policy, basically provides you a defense. And that can be very costly.
To come out of pocket if you don't have that coverage, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears here entirely, Dan. And I wonder if you could speak to something that I've been hearing a lot about, which is just wire fraud.
Yeah, wire transfer fraud is basically a real emerging risk that we see and are working really hard as an industry to educate and take the appropriate steps to minimize, the risks that consumers and others have in relation to, wire transfer fraud utilized as part of the real property acquisition. And, we're kind of in a situation now where that's by far the most prevalent method. For example, for acquiring a piece of property, you determine what your net cost is, and then you wire monies to the recipient as part of the transaction. In the past, we oftentimes used certified checks and things like that. And I imagine way back in the day, you probably, if you had good funds, you might even have had, if you went way back, maybe there was a cash transaction,
a suitcase of cash or a duffel bag.
Yeah, well, but now there's a lot of limitations as to what you can do with cash from a reporting standpoint, things like that. But I'm just thinking, back in the day when in the 1800s or something like that, you might. A lot of times that was before title insurance as well, but cash might have been king. Now, so just to understand, it's business email compromise schemes. It's not just this is not just an issue that we have to deal with in relation to the real estate acquisition. It's a broader attack on the manner in which we communicate and transfer funds in today's economy, but we focus on it primarily from the standpoint of educating so that homeowners or future homeowners don't all of a sudden find out that they've been scammed and they've now sent their life savings to a scamster and aren't in a position to basically purchase the house of their dreams because of certain scamming activities. And just, I don't know how much your audience focuses on this, but we look at it a significant amount of time on this topic as an industry. And so if you went to alta.org /wire transfer, you could get a lot of information on this. And because it's a public service issue, you don't have to be a member to access that collateral. And we've got a lot of great information on there to educate and also to take steps to protect. But if I were to back up just a little bit, now these aren't all the most current pieces of data, but Alta did the American Land Title Association, we'll refer to it, I'll slip up and call it Alta as we go forward, but that's what I'm referring to. We did the 2021 Wire Fraud and Cybercrime Survey. Title insurance professionals reported cyber criminals attempted to trick employees to wire funds to fraudulent accounts in about a third of all real estate and mortgage transactions. Now just think about that. That is.
Wait, did you say a third of all real estate transactions? There was some attempt at fraud?
A third. And, wire fraud attempts are on the rise nationwide. 76% of title agents reported wire fraud attempts were the same or increased in 2020. And also the FBI's Internet Crime Compliance Center, it's IC3. I mean, for whatever reason, we might reference that. That's what that means.
Okay.
Reported 13,648 prospective home buyers were defrauded out of $213 million through real estate wire fraud. And this was 2020, which was an increase of 17% from the year before. And obviously,
oh my gosh,
cyber attacks as a whole are also on the rise. And as a reflection of that, during the second quarter of 2021, cyber insurance coverage increased 25.5%. So, notwithstanding all of the efforts that we and our broader industry partners are taking to alert people of these challenges, but the cyber criminals and fraudsters also are evolving to go after basically the wire transfers in real estate and other business email compromise schemes. And if we were to kind of look back at this and what are the techniques that they use, just generally, there's concepts like social engineering and phishing, and phishing is not with a pull, it's the PHIS, excuse me, IS.
I thought we were going to go catch some salmon.
Yeah, you're not going to catch salmon or a bass in this example, but basically what they'll do is they will use their fraudulent approaches to try to infiltrate. And let's just use a consumer as an example. And a lot of consumers will use unsecured email portals. I'm not going to name them, but we all know what's out there. And so basically they will find ways to get you to click on things or do other things that allow them to plant kind of their cyber tools into your email account. And then when triggers such as real estate transaction or things like that happen, they start to monitor those transactions. And at the last second, then they basically would mimic one of the professional email addresses involved with the transaction and get the consumer to then wire funds to the wrong recipient. And, we're talking some of these people, it could be $500,000 their life savings going to purchase a house, or 150 or $1 million. And all of a sudden, then when they do show up for closing, and this is not a laughing matter, but it's just amazing how dangerous this is. But they do show up for closing, and then the title company says, well, we or the lender or whoever the recipient was going to be for the wire transfer says we never received it. And so there are certain things that we do as an industry to try to combat this scourge. So basically, from my standpoint, a couple things that you should keep in mind, and the audience should keep in mind, is what we do as an industry then is we try to do a lot of consumer education, as well as work with our the realtors, the bankers, and others in the broader industry to coordinate and make sure that we can get ahead of this. But we provide consumer warnings about the dangers of this on websites and communications. And then we send notices to consumers, real estate agents, and others that informs them, the parties to the transaction, of the title company's wire instructions that they will never change during the transaction. So we get that set up front, because what happens is there's always a last second change that gives rise to the diversion of funds to the illicit parties' account, and oftentimes the fraudsters are overseas, and if you don't catch it quickly, it's very difficult to claw it back. So you might have 24 to 48 hours after the illicit transfer occurs to pull that money back. And so from that standpoint, that's why we advise early on in the transaction that you're not going to get an email from us changing the wire transfer, wire fraud, the wire transfer instructions. And so there's also a couple other things that we look at. We exchange known numbers. So, for example, what the fraudsters will do is they'll mimic a legitimate email address with a diversion.
Okay.
And then they'll have stuff in there, and they might also, have social engineered and followed the account so they know the names and who the husband is, all this kind of stuff, so that it looks real. And then they basically say, if you have any questions, contact, and I'm not going to pick on Louise, but why not? Louise at such and such a number. Okay, well, Louise is just basically working with the fraudsters, so you call and they basically have a pat answer if you were to call. And so basically, we also then, at the beginning of the transaction, want to set the known numbers that if there's any questions, they can call, because if you rely upon the email will also cover that contingency to basically complete the scam. And so they're really quite tricky here. Couple things that I would mention here also. So some of the things that we see, for example, the title insurance professionals put in their basically email signature lines. They'll have things like, I'm just going to read a couple here. Due to increased fraud, buyers, sellers, and lenders should confirm all wiring instructions by phone directly with our office before transferring funds to a previously disclosed phone number. I've got another one here. Warning, wire fraud advisory. Wire fraud and email hacking, phishing attacks are on the increase. If you have an escrow or closing transaction with us and you receive an email containing wire transfer instructions, and then in uppercase, do not respond to the email. Instead, call your escrow officer, closer immediately, using previously known contact information and not information provided in the email. So we provide quite a bit of education and warnings to consumers. But the challenge is this, a consumer, we get everybody educated and we get all these transactions that go smoothly, but then kind of on a rolling basis, you've got a new group of consumers every 3 months or so.
Right.
I mean, it's a rolling new group of consumers, so it's a constant need to educate. There's constantly a new group of people out there that the fraudsters can go after. And so this is kind of like the Greek tragedy of pushing the rock up the hill. Basically, we're always on top of this, but there's always risk. And so from that standpoint, I really do think we are going to have to keep combating this, and people need to be aware of it. And that's why it's great that you are doing a podcast that highlights these risks so that consumers and others can pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're happy to do it. And so, Dan, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like that initial communication that you're starting to have with your title or escrow closing officer at the beginning of the transaction is kind of setting the tone or setting up the proper information, if you will, because those cyber tools that you were mentioning really sit and kind of wait and lurk for the transaction to occur.
Yeah, before it to ripen to that right spot where all of a sudden they swoop in and give you, we're changing where you need to send the money. And if you recall, the average consumer, it's a complex deal, and they've got all kinds of stuff going on. They're arranging for the moving van. You look at the list of things that they're doing in relation to a real property transaction, and moving from one, whether from one home to another or from an apartment to a home, and the like, they're very busy and they're very easily distracted. And so that's why we really focus on this. If I could, I would also like to highlight some of the stuff that you should do if you do find yourself to be a victim.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do discover that funds are transferred to a fraudulent account, you really need to act quickly, and you should contact the financial institution immediately upon discovering the fraudulent transfer, and request that the financial institution contact the corresponding financial institution where the fraudulent transfer was sent. Now, you also should contact your local Federal Bureau, FBI office if the wire is recent. The FBI, working with the United States Department of Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, we call that FinCEN, might be able to help return or freeze those funds. And then you could file a complaint regardless of dollar loss with www.ic3.gov. And so it's really important for consumers to recognize that if they do find that there's fraudulent activity, they need to act. And like I said before, oftentimes, but not always, but oftentimes you've got foreign actors that are targeting U.S. citizens to try to divert funds. And so the money could flow into that alternative bank account that you didn't want to receive the funds, but then they're going to maybe chop that up and send it in multiple directions real quickly. And so it's really hard to claw that back if it gets into multiple transactions and is overseas. And so that's why you really need to move quickly, and you oftentimes are able to recover a good portion or at least some of the funds that were diverted.
Okay. And how long should a wire transfer typically take? Because I've filled out numerous wire transaction orders and they said, we'll send it at the end of the day or what have you, and then you'll get a confirmation. So how long should people wait before reaching out to the other party and say, hey, did you get it, without freaking out?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is it's really a good idea to to confirm stuff contemporaneously. I mean, I wouldn't think around with this. From my standpoint, if you wait a couple days, it's too late.
Right. But so after initiating a wire and I call my title escrow officer and it's been an hour and they haven't received it, should I start sweating bullets?
These things go pretty quickly.
Okay.
And so I would move quickly. I don't have an exact time frame, and we could get that to you to follow up. But from my standpoint, I wouldn't wait more than an hour to get confirmation.
Okay. That's great. Any other tips, tricks, advice for folks that they should be aware of, things they can do proactively?
Yeah, I think number one, they just don't click on attachments in emails if you don't know where it's coming from, because that's a vehicle to get kind of like what they call a Trojan horse, or and I'm not a tech expert per se, so I might use the wrong terminology here, but basically they'll use something that you click on to basically infiltrate your email system so that the fraudsters are now inside and can kind of monitor what's going on. And so they can do it here, but there's also risks of them being in there as well to steal identities and other things that could happen in addition to the challenges that we're talking about today. Now, but I would also say that, the Alta website has a lot of great information here. And so I would recommend, if people want to follow up on this and have any concerns, that they could go to that website and look at all the tools. So we've created lots of products to help raise awareness and protect consumers. So there's a rapid response plan, which is a 10-step guide on what to do and who to contact if you've been hit by wire fraud. There's also the Alta registry. And this basically is kind of a phone book for basically title agents, so that banks can basically look at the title agencies that are on the registry as well as the underwriters, and we could get into kind of the distinction between the insurance side and the agent side of our business. But suffice it to say, we don't want to necessarily confuse people, but basically we have agents who will issue the policies on behalf of the insurance entities, and some of the insurance entities in some areas will also have direct operations that do that functionality. The registry basically has all of those different entities identified on there so that a lender can go there and essentially verify that who they're dealing with is a legitimate operation. And so that's a great tool for the lending community to basically reduce their risk. We've also created, the Board of Governors for the American Land Title Association also created an information security committee a couple of years ago, and to basically examine security matters and threats that affect our membership and by extension, consumers. And they basically make cyber awareness, prevention, detection, and response and recovery methods for the industry. We also have on our website a page dedicated to information security. There's federal and state requirements to protect data. There's also Alta's best practices, which has pillars of appropriate conduct or recommended conduct, which are all designed to basically, move everything in the right direction. And we have we've done webinars. We've also have videos and other infographics on there about this challenge that's out there. And so it's really a great resource to look at to basically see what the challenges are and what steps you might want to take. And there's some real great practical advice on there as well. And one thing that we have discovered is that, for example, the title agencies and insurance entities that do the kind of the steps up front, so that they've trained their people on this risk, are less likely to have a loss. And so it's really a great campaign for everybody to pay attention to. And in that regard, I would just mention one more thing here, and that is that the American Land Title Association helped form a national coalition called the Coalition to Stop Real Estate Wire Fraud. And so the goal of that was to raise awareness about the dangers of the mortgage closing schemes and wire transfer fraud across a broader spectrum of our broader industry, the lenders, realtors, and so forth that are involved in the greater ecosphere of what we do. And it explains how it happens. It provides tips to prevent it and what to do if you've been targeted by fraud. And there's also a video that can be uploaded if you have an issue to share your story. So there's a lot of resources out here. But from my perspective, we are going to have to keep battling this, attack on kind of the entire system and the attacks that are kind of perpetrated against consumers that may not be aware that those risks are out there. Yeah. And so we have to educate and provide the tools, and then also provide practical methods to minimize the likelihood that the fraudsters are successful. And so we're going to keep battling this challenge. And I think that your podcast and getting it out to consumers so that they become aware that this risk is out there, they just need to be aware and be careful if they get involved in a real estate transaction to not let this happen to themselves. Yeah, that's so great. And we will definitely link in the show notes to the Alta website, because that's great. That's great. Dan, this has been fantastic and super informative. Any final thoughts before we let you out of here? Well, I don't want people to be afraid. I mean, home ownership is great. Doom and gloom. I mean, don't just keep renting all your life because you're concerned about wire transfer fraud. But if you do decide to purchase, or if it's your second or third time of purchasing, real estate, a home, and making those life-changing events, which are so meaningful, basically make sure that you're aware of these risks, take appropriate action to ensure that you do not become a victim of fraud, and listen to your title professionals as well as the broader, realtors, mortgagees, and mortgage companies, lenders, and so forth that all have an interest in making sure that you have a great experience and that you aren't a victim of fraud. Love it. Love it. Well, Dan, thank you again for coming on and spending some time with me. I really appreciate it, and look forward to chatting with you soon. I'm glad to have this conversation, and appreciate your taking a moment to address these really important topics. Thanks so much. My pleasure. Thank you. Alrighty, everyone. That was our episode. A big, big, big thank you to Dan and the American Land Title Association. Super informative, lots and lots of good info in there, and definitely a great website for a resource to check out as well. Hope you enjoyed the episode. We look forward to seeing you on the next one. And as always, happy investing.